very interesting mailing lists with way more detail about the human body than I really wanted. So I'm kind of relieved I'm now got a far more sensible job title. I head up customer insight and futures with BT. I'm part of BT's innovation team. Also, having a much more boring job title means that the crystal ball jokes don't get thrown around as well. So yeah, don't have a crystal ball. What you're going to see is research, basically, around where we think AI is going in terms of shaping and recreating different customer experiences. Now, my obligatory slide is this particular one. This is a slide I have to put up because BT is atrocious at telling anyone that we do innovation. In fact, we're the third biggest innovator in terms of investment in the UK. We're behind a couple of pharmaceutical companies. We generate a lot of patents. We were actually, last year, we actually filed the most patents of any UK corporate in the AI space. So we've got a lot of activity around research and innovation. I'm actually based at a lovely place called Adastral Park, which is our main UK innovation facility. We're just outside Ipswich in the east of England. And there's about 5,000 people innovating and doing research on site. And to be honest, that is the reason I do not need a crystal ball, because I can literally walk down a corridor and find somebody who is the world-leading expert in AI or quantum key cryptography. And I can ask them lots of very dumb questions. And I am allowed to do that because I'm a slightly weird person within the innovation community in BT. I am not a technologist. I am a psychologist. And really, there is a logic to having a social scientist in an innovation team, mainly because I keep saying the most disruptive part of innovation is not the technology, it is us. Because unless we adopt the technology and use it to change the way that we work, rest, and play, it is, frankly, useless. So most of my research is really around consumer trends, consumer behaviors, and how we respond to those behaviors using technologies. And you will hopefully see some of the thinking around that. But I'm going to talk about Botman versus Super Agent today, mainly because I really, really love superhero movies, but also I want to try and cut through some of the hype around AI, and you might have noticed there is quite a lot of hype out there. We've got the Robo-Armageddon coming, apparently, according to the press. Robots are going to eat all of the jobs. They usually quote the Oxford study, the 47% of jobs are at high risk of automation in the next 10 years. I must admit, I kind of have some issues with that particular study. I think it takes a far, far too naive a view of what a job is, because most jobs are like jigsaw puzzles of pieces. Some of those pieces can be very easily automated. Other pieces cannot. So I tend to believe research that kind of takes a much more task-oriented view of jobs. So McKinsey, the OECD, have come up with far lower figures than 47%, usually between 5 and 14%. Also, that does not take into account job creation. For sure, most of us are going to get touched by automation, and already we are, to be honest. But the OECD reckon that 60% of jobs could have about 30% of our tasks automated. And that's often the task that we don't really want to do. And I always quote at this point some really old research. I'm sure all of you have seen this before, but I learned this at university, Moravec's paradox. The fact that, Hans Moravec was a roboticist, he said that there are fundamental things that machines are really good at doing. Particularly if there's a lot of data, there's a lot of process, there's a lot of rules, there's not a huge amount of uncertainty or chaos. Machines are pretty good at those kind of situations. That is, however, not the real world. And that's why when we see progress in AI, much of that progress, in fact, this week, progress in poker playing. Brilliant. I mean, it's amazing work. But poker is a game. There are subtleties to that game. But it's a game. It has rules. There are data you can simulate. Actually, a lot of the things that Moravec said are hard for machines and actually easy for even a 3-year-old to do are still pretty hard for machines to do. And I'm going to concentrate down on one major area today, and that area is conversation. Because conversation is actually very, very difficult to automate. Human language was not built to communicate with machines. There's a lot of ambiguity in language. And language is a living thing as well. It evolves, so meaning may change. So having a conversation with a machine is quite difficult. I don't know about you. I have yet to have a particularly profound conversation with Alexa or Siri or Cortana. Yes, they're getting better, but actually we are far better at it. So one has to think, well, actually, this isn't about AI. It's about augmenting humans and actually using the AI to help us create better conversations, which is where customer experience kind of comes in. Now, customer experience is a weird thing. I work in mainly contact centers, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the changing role of the contact center as we go along. But if we look at what customer experience is about, generally in most global corporates, and that's who I typically work with, I innovate with and for our global corporates. I work a lot with airlines, for example. If we talk about customer experience in airlines, yes, there's an awful lot of automation that is already there. I can already check in and get my boarding pass using an app. In fact, in the airport, I don't talk to people. I don't actually meet anyone who is a representative of the airline. The trouble with customer experience is actually those check-in processes, getting my boarding pass on an app, it's all pretty similar, regardless of the airline that I'm actually checking in with. And that's one of the problems with automation alone and customer experience. If we're using it to build distinctiveness in a brand, technology is very, very easy to copy. And actually, those experiences become very vanilla. So what actually makes the customer experience? Now, George Zakadakis, who was a wonderful academic in Greece, has done some very nice stuff around, well, where do people make the difference in brand and customer experience? And actually, we can use an example of the pilots versus the cabin crew. Now, pilots are fairly essential, I would suggest, in airlines, at the moment at least. But of course, airlines largely, an airplane largely flies itself. To be honest, the pilot is an emergency backup. Now, I would hope that they are proficient at flying the plane. I'm sure I might get confidence enough to go on a plane that has no pilot, but just not yet. I don't trust that. I want my pilot to be able to fly the plane, please. Now, should I then upskill my pilot to do loop-the-loops? It's probably not going to actually add a huge amount to brand. So I would suggest no, that's not where investment should go when we're looking at investment cases on customer experience. The investment case is far stronger on what we call pivotal roles. And to be honest, it's the cabin crew. They are the face of the airline, but they also have to deal with us, the customer. And of course, we can be a bit weird. We can be very inconsistent. We can panic. We can do all sorts of weird and wonderful things on the flight. So actually, that's quite difficult to automate. We can actually automate the routine tasks, but those very human tasks, conversation, empathy, actually the cabin crew is far better at. So if we look at investment for automation, yeah, we'd probably automate the pilots, but we probably wouldn't automate the cabin crew. We would automate aspects of their job, but help them to differentiate the brand. So brand is a very significant part of deciding where to put AI in the customer experience. Now, we do a lot of research in BT. It's not crystal ball gazing. This is actually a snippet from some global research that we do in 10 countries very regularly. We do it every other year. We're about to do this research again. And it looks at trends. It looks at how consumers want to interact with brands. And one of the things that's coming out very strongly is personalization. Now, the great thing is that personalization and AI go together very well. And that's the first step. Learn about me as a customer. I call this a me economy. I will teach you about me if you give me a personalized experience back. But that's all about my data. So I am trading my data for personalization. Now, actually, personalization's been around for a very long time. Netflix do it. Amazon do it. I have taught Amazon everything it knows about me. And I get value from that. But that's the first step. So once we know the customer, we can start to become proactive with the customer. So that's a lot of the work that I'm doing at the moment. Can we start to send customers messages about stuff that they want to know? That's the first thing. What do they want to know? Second thing is, what channel do they want to know it on? And then what time are they likely to be looking at that channel? So working with a few startups in the area, actually a lot of them are bigger than startups. So in our portfolio at the moment, we've got IMI Mobile, we've got Contact Engine. They do exactly that. They apply algorithms to learn about the customer, figure out proactivity, and send proactive messages out so that we push demand out of the contact center. And actually customers generally like that. So we've got personalized, we've got proactive, and then we get a real kick in the algorithms. Predictive. Can we start to figure out what the customer wants before the customer knows they want it? Now, human nature is interesting here. I'm a psychologist by background, so one of the problems here is I call it the creepy line. Does it get creepy? So we know that a few of the supermarkets around the world have now been brilliant with their data, so that they are very predictive. In fact, one of those big supermarket chains told me that, one of their analysts told me, they know if you're about to get divorced. Now, knowing about that and doing something about that are very different things. I probably wouldn't get IMI Mobile and Contact Engine to send a message out to say, I'm really sorry to hear you're getting divorced, because, well, frankly, you might not know. But maybe something more subtle, like vouchers for wine, I don't know. But that kind of thing really does require a human in the loop. Now, the trouble, of course, with creepiness is that we lose trust in organizations. It becomes something, and as I said, this is a me economy. I stop sharing my data at this point. And we know, actually, algorithms can be brilliant, but they do not work by magic. They work by data. And under GDPR, I have every right as a customer to withdraw my consent. So we need to think about this. This is a particularly interesting trend as we get into the realm of the Internet of Things, smart cities, smart buildings, because if I find this stuff creepy, I'm not going to use it, and therefore it doesn't become that useful. Now, in terms of customer trends, the big trend for interaction with organizations is chats. Chat is absolutely where it's at. Customers like a chat channel, whether it's web chat, whether it's WhatsApp, they like engaging on this channel. And we're seeing a 20% growth in 2 years in terms of customers' preference for chat as a channel. But equally, when I work with contact centers on chat, we're getting a lot of the very routine transactional stuff coming through chat that, frankly, when we look at the allocation between human and machine, the human's not very good at repetitive, boring stuff. In fact, it does not add the value of a human agent. So that is why we get to the core topic, chatbots. Now, I have to say, chatbots are most of my life. At the moment, I'm working with a few banks, some insurers, some airlines, some retailers on chatbot implementations. And the first thing that tends to happen is they come to us and say, we want a chatbot. My first question is, why do you want a chatbot? My second question is, what data do you have to power this chatbot? Because again, it won't work without data. Now, therein lies one of the problems, because what we found in a number of these things that I've been working on is that data in many, many large enterprises is a horrible mess. It's on multiple systems. It's inconsistent. It's unstable. Therefore, chatbots often fall over when you try and use that data. So the first thing is usually to push back and say, what are you going to do about your data? Before you can do the exciting, cool chatbot stuff, sort your data out. Usually a bit of a sour expression at that point, because sorting data out is boring, chatbots are exciting. So we start to see that, customers quite like chatbots. We've got 73% of customers saying that they think it's going to improve customer experience. Frankly, we are not seeing that this is the case. Now, I have to say there are some brilliant chatbots out there. There are some horrible ones. We can probably all tell stories about the horrible experiences we've had with chatbots. But there are some good ones. My personal favorite is actually Lidl, the supermarket, deployed a chatbot called Margot. Margot does one thing very well: food-wine combinations. Now, I do not drink wine, so I always get it wrong. I buy the wrong wine for the wrong food, frankly. So Margot manages to talk me through this. Now, I quite often have friends who are wine snobs. I often go and eat with them. Usually the first thing I do is, what are we eating? Fish and chips on a Friday. Apparently the perfect combination for fish and chips is champagne. That's just increased my Fishy Friday cost, I have to say. But of course, Lidl can then sell champagne off the back of this. That's a good example of an interaction, because there's a lot of data that we can get on food-wine combinations. It's narrow and it's deep. There is data there. I think the less successful bots are the ones that try and ask me anything, because actually that is incredibly difficult to do. So I call chatbots often IVR for digital. This is about taking chat and actually trying to triage the customer. And as I said, a lot of it's to do with what data is it being powered off. Yes, I can take FAQs, but you're probably going to have to rewrite your FAQs into a conversational style. And actually, are they really the FAQs that customers are asking you? What's it appropriate for? We did actually try an implementation for complaints. Now, the first problem we found was complaints are often very long. So you've got maybe 5, 6 pages of text. Now, the first thing we've got to do is pass that into a form that the machine can actually figure out what it's about. Now, human language, as I said before, is wildly redundant. So I need to script most of that out in order to get the relevant bits. So that's the first problem. Second problem is, particularly in the UK and Ireland, we often complain using sarcasm. And as we know, algorithms and sarcasm frequently struggle together. So just a few examples here, my favorite ones. Thank you to a particular train operating company for my free sauna this morning. The algorithm thought that was great, brilliant. Now, why wouldn't it? It's never been on a train and it's never had a sauna, and it doesn't know that if you put the two together, that is really not great. I would need to teach it that. Why would I teach it that is one very big question. The second one is even worse and very British. It was so good to see that your maintenance department hadn't spoilt things by making unnecessary repairs. Now, I know that's sarcasm. I don't even know how I would start to teach a machine that that was sarcasm. Now, I am told that there is a company out there with 300 employees that are tagging sarcasm, because that's about the only way you can do it. But they're going to have a very, very long and big job, frankly. It's a tough one to crack, as is context. So a lot of this is around trying to recognize the context that the customer is in. And yes, we can pick up, swearing or incendiary language. Certainly there are some startups out there that are using the cameras in smartphones to analyze micro expressions on my face as I look at my smartphone camera. Now, that can give the algorithm some insight into what I'm maybe feeling, but is it the emotion of the thing I'm looking at that's going on, or is someone yelling at me in the background? We don't know what the context is on that, so it could be useful. It is also creepy. So I'm not sure I want my smartphone analyzing my facial expressions. So again, as a customer, I'm probably going to withdraw my permission. But what we've actually learned is that intelligent routing is quite key to customer experience here. So rather than having a customer have a conversation with a bot that inevitably says, I don't understand, what we need to do is to start to figure out what the conversation was about and route it to the appropriate agent, and also take everything that the customer has said to the bot across to the agent as well, so the agent can pick up the conversation and apply the power of the human mind. So actually what we're finding is this isn't rip and replace. What it's starting to do already, and we've got a lot of automation in contact centers, is to change the role of the agent. We cannot have a 16-year-old with a script anymore. We need to train these people. We need to probably pay them a bit more because they have slightly different jobs. Everyone from Sally, I call her the Swiss Army knife, she's picking up where the customer, basically couldn't get any further with the bot. So she's trying to do that triage. She's trying to solve complex problems. When they get very complex, we've got Paula, who is a problem solver. This is where computers said no. We stick the fork into the spaghetti of back-end process on behalf of the customer to sort out a complex problem. Then we've got Natalie, a negotiator. Now, negotiation is quite rules-based, but it's also social and emotional. That bit's hard to actually automate. So we're probably going to need a lot of Natalie's. Tony's a techie. Now, I discovered my first encounter with AI actually in BT was back in 1990. I am that old. But I did a whole load on neural networks at that point, looking at complex fault diagnostics. And my mechanism for doing that was to interview our BT engineers around how they diagnosed complex faults. And you'd get this lovely decision tree, and then you'd hit the bottom, and you'd go, why did you decide it was that, not that? And they'd go, gut feeling. I can't put gut feeling in a neural network, and a lot of the knowledge that we have is up here. Yes, we can use that knowledge to teach bots, and these guys are going to be teaching a lot of bots things that we are much better at doing than they are. but a lot of it also needs a human in the loop. I included Chris. He's a gig economy advisor. He has very, very specific skills, but he's in the cloud, and we can kind of spontaneously call upon Chris when we have that need. So it's a very different type of advisor than we have in contact centers today, which is I always say that contact centers are often on the bleeding edge of innovation. There's a lot of automation here. It is changing the skill sets, not eliminating them, which is why, of course, it isn't Botman versus super agent. It's Botman plus super agent. I learned something this morning. Centaurs we are becoming, apparently. We are combining the assets of machines and the assets of man. I always use the Terminator versus Iron Man scenario. I don't want technology that eliminates jobs. I want technology that augments me. Hence, I love the term augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. I want to be Iron Man. I want a cool head-up display. I want to prolong my life using technology, and I want to be able to fly. All of those things augment my abilities, and I think in the customer experience space, it is all about creating that differentiation using both man and machine. Thank you for listening.
In essence, we help consumers kind of navigate the fairly horrific process of trying to find a mortgage, find their way through the jargon and misinformation, and get to certainty about what they need very quickly. In terms of growth, we are still roughly tripling year on year, both in terms of volume and in terms of headcount, which is approaching about 200 people in the business.
Tripling, what does that mean numbers-wise? Tripling. That could be 1 or 1 million?
Oh, no, so I guess we've now processed just coming up for £2.5 billion worth of mortgages.
That's all right, we like that sort of money. All right. And why do you do what you do?
Because I have a deep and abiding love of mortgages.
I'll take it. All right, Romi, go for it.
So I'm Romi Savova. I'm the CEO of PensionBee, and we're an online pension provider. I started the company in 2014 after a harrowing transfer experience of my own, trying to move my pension from my old employer into any provider who would take my money, and discovered that that is a job that is really, really difficult for consumers. And so in 2015, together with our CTO, Jonathan, we started working on a product that would enable you to give us a bit of information about yourself. We would then go off and find and combine your pensions into one new online plan. We work with some of the world's biggest money managers, BlackRock, State Street, Legal & General. And we quickly discovered that, once your pensions are in one place, what consumers really want is an online pension provider where they can manage their money, their pension money more broadly and plan for retirement. So we've been on this journey for a couple of years now. We manage just over $500 million in assets under management. Our team is 65 now, but I'm told we'll be at about 90 by the end of the year. And it's been a fantastic growth experience. A difficult one, but fantastic and fun.
Okay. Reza, over to you. 1 minute.
So my name's Reza Merchant. I'm the founder and CEO of The Collective. Started the company in 2010, really as a response to being a young person in London and struggling to find any remotely decent and affordable accommodation. So we essentially develop and operate co-living spaces. Co-living is a way of living which combines well-designed, compact, private living spaces with a wealth of shared space and amenity space, but most importantly, a way to activate those spaces in a way that brings people together and gives people a strong sense of community and belonging, and really enables people to learn, grow, and achieve their full potential. Over the last 24 months, we've really focused on our international expansion. So we now have offices in Berlin and New York and projects across the US, Germany, and London. And so we're up to about 8,500 units, either up and running or under development. And yeah, over the last 4 years, we've also been sort of doubling year on year in terms of headcount. And yeah, very, very excited for what the future holds. I really feel like it's just the start of the journey.
Okay. Sven, you are our late addition to the panel. So everyone give it up for Sven. All right. Sven, you got a minute. Tell us who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
So I'm Sven de Klein. I'm actually Belgian. So I came from across the channel. Basically, what we do is at IMEC, we're the biggest independent research institute in Europe on digital and nanotech. So we develop all kinds of fascinating new technologies. And within IMEC, I run the accelerator program called IMEC iStart, in which we not only support tech startups in general, so they do not necessarily spin out from IMEC as a research institute. We also help external startups. But we also invest in them. So I basically have seen now almost 200 ventures, of which a quarter already really big scale-ups from very close by, both from the support side as well as from the investment side. So in terms of growth, I mean, it depends what kind of figures you'd like to hear, but my team has also doubled year after year for the past 4 years, so we're now with a 20-people team. It has its own scale-up challenges, but it's a bit different, of course, than with the real scale-ups and startups.
Okay, we'll get into that. All right, so thank you ever so much. Right, let's talk about risks. Okay, so you are all startups in your own right. You started out very small. You're absolutely scaling at the moment. Talk to me about the risks to consider when you sort of decide to go into somewhere where you've got to disrupt. So pension's a great example. Habito's another one, that sort of stuff. I think you're going up against, eventually it's going to be the We company, isn't it? They're going to be pushing really hard into this sort of company. Talk to me about what you actually, what is it like, how do you know when you've got something really right and all of that sort of stuff? What do you know when it's like, that's going to be a punt, we need to take a risk on that?
I mean, everything is a bit of a risk when you're working on a company in the very early phases, even just quitting your job and deciding that you want to venture out and let go of a very secure paycheck is actually quite a risk. And it's really that first moment when you start up that you feel you've taken the biggest risk in some ways.
Be more specific for me. Sorry, let me rephrase. Go into right now what you're doing and like how you get up every morning knowing that you've got big people who are literally coming for your throat.
I mean, I feel like we're actually those people who are going for the big guys. The way we operate is we essentially consolidate pensions that you have with many of the big pension providers and bring them into PensionBee. So we transfer those monies. And over the last few years, we've had multiple instances where they have said, we don't like that. But I think that in a disruptive industry, if you stand on the side of the consumer, you're pretty much always guaranteed to win, is what we've uncovered. Mm-hmm. And that's something that permeates throughout our whole company. So we know that when we are doing right by the consumer, even if we're going up against some of the biggest insurers, we're going to win. So
let's delve into that, because some of these guys are running startups, and I've spoken to them earlier today. One of their biggest challenges is constantly talking to their consumers and figuring out like scale of inquiries and all of that sort of thing. How do you guys manage that?
So it's an interesting question, particularly with tech-led businesses, which, as the speaker before was alluding to, are often looking for kind of tech-enabled solutions to talking to consumers. So this kind of abstraction of the person you're actually trying to help from the people who are actually trying to build it, I think can be quite challenging. And actually, I think more and more, particularly in things like mortgages and financial services, it's very tempting to kind of want to tinker with the machinery of, the mortgage market and how the banks operate and what mortgage brokers do. But actually that stuff is relatively, although an interesting kind of puzzle to solve, the only puzzle that is of any real value is the kind of the empathetic puzzle with the consumer. So most people, talking from my own experience of mortgages, are utterly terrified, think that they know a lot more than they do ordinarily, and trying to kind of allow the consumer to kind of navigate this maze while kind of signaling to you where they want help and where they don't want help is kind of essential in getting that feedback loop. In order to kind of fuel your product development. And I think that's the key thing, is when you're, particularly in the startup phase, you have to be so conclusive and so definitive in all of your opinions. You have to have figured out the solution. And actually the reality is most of those brilliant ideas you put in the first pitch deck don't survive it to your Series B. Mm-hmm. And I think that sort of emotional honesty and kind of intellectual breadth to kind of allow that feedback to come in and kind of steer the path as you go can be quite difficult for a testosterone-fueled founder.
Okay. Any comments on testosterone fuel founders?
Well, I'm female, and my co-founder is male. I think that we tend to operate quite well as a team. Our management team is actually more female than male.
Oh, interesting.
And I do find that has certain dynamics. So I think that as you're scaling in particular, you do have to make these choices because if you're a small company and you start off with, 4 people of the same gender, that's a 100% ratio of the same gender, but it's only 4 people. And I think that at our size, we have the opportunity to make deliberate decisions about how we want to be shaped. And that's been one of the key things about scaling for us, making sure that your values are reflected in the type of organization that you're growing across the board.
Would you say that's a risk if you're top-heavy, testosterone, or female and that sort of thing? You should have that balance, whatever.
I think balance is really important because if you're a consumer-facing organization, your consumers are going to be pretty diverse and varied. And if you don't have that perspective within your company and that perspective is not empowered with decision-making power, then you're probably just building for a niche.
Okay. Reza, same question. Biggest risks when you're attacking sort of large competitors and that sort of thing? You're kind of in a new set on your own, but there are people who obviously do what you do and are coming for you.
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple of things. One, we as human beings are all responsible for how we respond to any stimuli, right? So if there is a risk, you can either choose to let it overpower you, scare you, fill you with fear, or you can use it to inspire you, motivate you, and make you kind of give everything you have to overcoming that risk. So I think a lot of it is about mindset and how we kind of condition ourselves to respond to a certain situation. I also think that self-belief or belief in general is so important, because if you have 100% belief and conviction in what you're doing, that then becomes contagious, yeah? Like investors, team, customers, they can see that and they can feel that and they're drawn to that. If it comes from an authentic place, people are drawn to that. And I believe that if you have enough belief and conviction in what you do, and then you're willing to follow that through with action and persistence and relentless drive, anything is possible. And actually, I believe that our capacity as human beings is far beyond our imagination. So I think we as human beings are capable of doing things that we can't even imagine that we're capable of doing. And I say that because I could have never have predicted or imagined that we would have built what we have today. It was beyond my imagination at the point where I started the business.
Sven, you were nodding throughout that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate to that, because what I often see in founding teams, I can relate to a lot of what has been said before. I think both the diversity aspect is very important in terms of, and sometimes you don't have the diversity in the founding team, but you can complement that by building in the diversity in an advisory board or board of directors or that kind of thing. So you need indeed constantly to capture those signals. At the same time, that ultimate belief and imagination is important. And what I always see in our entrepreneurs in the ventures we support as well is, I always say the entrepreneurs need to have some kind of, or some level of stubbornness. They need to stick to their original idea up to a certain level until they capture enough information from the market that they need to adapt, they need to change. But on the other hand, also investors, by the way, not only customers, but also investors like to see indeed that passion and that belief in their own product. And if you change and adapt too quickly, they also think hey, but if someone else tells them to go elsewhere tomorrow, they might change again. So.
Let me just play devil's advocate for a minute. I've been in rooms where I've seen people pitch who are incredibly passionate, and it's about a dog home outside of Walmart, and that sort of thing. And they've walked away with hundreds of thousands of pounds investment when Femtech's getting peanuts and that sort of stuff. Talk to me about passion in that sort of realm, because that's really kind of bullshit passion, isn't it?
Well, of course, passion should also relate to solving real-world problem.
Yeah.
You can be passionate about very stupid things too. I fully agree. So, both need to go hand in hand, I would say.
So from someone who helps people move along that sort of chain and sort of get them investment and all of that sort of stuff, talk to me about the risks and when you know that you've got someone and they're serious and that. What is that thing? What is that moment, or what is that nudge that you need to go they're the ones?
Well, obviously, throughout the years, I've seen many pitches of startups applying to the program and looking for investment. It's hard to put one finger on it, but obviously, when you see the pitches, passion is something you feel quite immediately when someone is bringing his idea in front of a jury. On the other hand, I would say the real belief in the idea and how well they thought things through, you feel that pretty fast after raising 1, 2, 3 critical questions. Then you immediately see how people respond to a tricky question. And that response says even more than the answer itself, content-wise.
Mm-hmm. Just going down the line quickly, what was the one thing when you were pitching your investors that really tipped them over the edge and they go, that's when they got it? Have they ever told you that?
I'm not sure anyone. They never told me.
Okay.
My sense.
And you didn't ask? Like,
I didn't ask.
For the next one, you're like, tell me what it was.
I was over the moon to have the money and moved on quickly.
Right.
But
is it just the amount of zeros they can make?
I tell you, it is unromantic, but like there are obviously like kind of arithmetic realities to venture capital, and it's something that I see a lot. Are like passionate entrepreneurs with brilliant ideas, and they just keep running up against the TAM slide, the total addressable market. And for VCs, with their 15-to-1 ratios and whatever else, if it can't be $1 billion, then it's not going to be interesting. And I think no amount of passion is going to get you through a top-tier VC IC unless the problem is large enough for them to be interested in helping you solve.
I find dogs is always a good pusher.
Dogs
All right,
helps.
go for it.
I mean, I think it depends on the type of capital that you're also raising. Right. So we didn't go down the VC route. We are funded by a large strategic and also by angels. And I think in angel investing, actually probably in all investing, you need to have some kind of a connection with the person on the other side of the room and have a sense that you can work together. I find that if they understand your business and your business model, then the conversation is just so much easier. If I have to explain to someone, what a pension is and how pensions generally work, like that tends to be a much harder conversation because we're starting over here rather than talking about a business model. And so I think it's connection, understanding of the industry and the sector. And then I think there's a belief that the business will work, right? Investors look at unit economics. Mm-hmm. And at some point, you need to be able to show that the unit economics work. I think if you have that, then...
Are any of you seeing that changes at the moment? You're seeing more sort of ethical investment or anything like that as you scale? Or it's still all about the Benjamins?
I would say that a lot of investors generally are becoming much more aware about investing in things that have a positive impact, and wanting to be invested in companies and things that are positively impacting the world. But I don't think that comes at the expense of making profit. Yeah, I think we're now kind of coming into this era where, like, solving the world's biggest problems and having a huge impact on the world can also then tie up with building a hugely profitable business that creates huge value for shareholders. And the two are it's no longer like the kind of social impact versus conventional for-profit businesses. I think that is converging across the board, because I think people in general are realizing that by doing good and by having a positive impact on the world, it actually creates a happier and more fulfilled existence.
From your lips. All right. Let's talk a bit. We talked a bit about trust, and there's been a lot of talk about trust throughout the whole day. When you are sort of coming up with propositions and figuring out what to change and that sort of stuff, how do you win the trust and then in some cases have to re-win the trust of your consumers? Like, what are the things that you're seeing work? What are you seeing not work and that sort of stuff? These are the things that the people want to hear, so be detailed.
I mean, I think there's some of the standard things, that So when it comes to advertising, for example, many startups start off digital only, right? So perhaps you're only advertising on Facebook or perhaps you're only on Google. But actually, as you scale up, you start to explore these offline channels. So things like outdoor, things like TV. And I do believe that if consumers see you in multiple different places and they have multiple different touch points with you, both digitally and offline, then that encourages trust in the brand because it shows that you're here and you have staying power.
Think back to when you had pennies, right?
When we had pennies.
When you had pennies. How did you get people to understand what you were and trust you and go like, what? Against these guys?
That comes down to the customer interactions, right? So when we started off and we had people calling us and talking to us about their pensions, being truthful and honest around what we were doing, what the old pension providers were doing, and actually helping people to understand their pensions better, that creates value for consumers, and then that ultimately creates trust. So I think being very honest and open in your interactions with your customers is the way to build that up when you're not advertising yet.
Daniel, give me some specifics of when you were trying to convince the world that they should be getting mortgages through you.
So I think it's a really interesting question. There is a little rain coming in.
More than welcome, yeah.
So it was interesting for us. So again, like when you're at the beginning of a startup, you're deeply insecure, you're a fantasist founder, like you're running around as the CEO of your made-up business, and you're desperate for there to be like something concrete that you can show the world to evidence that you deserve your status. And I think that often in the way that you end up talking to customers, then you kind of ignore like the deep interrogation of the problem and the kind of emotional journey they're on, and just want to tell them that you did it freer, faster, with better tech, more automated. And that's all great for investors fathoming scalability and so on and so forth. But actually for customers, it's incredibly dull just to hear a list of the top 3 things about your product. And I think a huge transitional point for us was kind of recognition that people cared much less about how quickly we did it and much more about the fact that we had like a fundamental empathetic connection with them. And so for us, we had, our old advertising was exactly as I described, fast, quick, free. And we got rid of all of that. We even pretty much stopped talking about what we do in our advertising. And we launched this campaign which just focused very, very simply on the kind of narrativization of the pain they were going through. So you may or may not have seen it, but disembodied hands tearing the money out of their pocket, computers vomiting jargon all over them until they dissolve into a pile of bones, which was a little bit of a nerve-wracking transition for me personally. But actually, like, why
was that so nerve-wracking? Just because it was so different, or
yeah, I think
that sort of creatives out there all the time, but it's not for what you do, right?
I think that's it. I think like mortgage is a trust relationship, and I think my nerves were like, are people going to take us seriously if we're like dissolving people in vomit? But actually, the reality is in order to like consumers are so savvy at this point and so used to being marketed at, like it takes something kind of off-center that kind of speaks to something true in them to garner their attention. And that completely changed the economics of our business.
Okay. Apart from vomit imagery, what else, Reza, changed your world when you were scaling up?
Sorry?
What else changed your world when you were scaling up? What was the thing that really worked for you?
I think focusing on people, and realizing that the most important part of any business is the people that are in that business.
All right, drill down. Come on, I've had that answer many times before. Be specific.
Well,
what do you mean about people? Do you mean not hiring dickheads?
Well, so when you're growing at a really fast rate, what happens is that people that were suitable for a certain role at a point in time, in 12 months' time, unless they grow as fast as the company is growing, they get outgrown. Yeah. So the way we think about it now is that we want to bring people into the business that are almost overqualified for a certain role, because we know that in 12, 18 months' time, the business is going to grow at a rate where they're no longer overqualified. Yeah. And so then that particular insight took me several years to figure out, because usually you look at what your needs are at a given point in time and you hire someone that can meet the needs at that specific moment.
Okay. Fair enough. I like that insight. Sven, anything on trust that you want to get in?
Yeah, maybe building on Reza's point here about growing the team. And basically, if you start scaling up, I've seen it in a couple of our ventures, you also need to be ready to trust your own people internally, because you need to give away or mandate them to do a lot of stuff, take a lot of stuff out of your hands as founder. And also on the recruitment side, I would say you need to trust the people that do the initial screening for you as a founder, because if you need to recruit like 5, 10, 20, 50 people a year, you can't see all the candidates anymore yourself. So you need to only narrow it down to see a selection, and that means that the people in your organization that pre-select the people for you, you need to be able to trust them as well. So it's not only about gaining the trust of your customers, it's also about internal trust, I would say.
Okay, I gave you a softball. What did you learn when you really learned? But let's talk about what you didn't learn when you knew what you knew. So when you were scaling up, what was the biggest thing you got wrong that you didn't see coming? And that's not a shitty question, so.
I think for me, like it was just like, I don't know, there's like, at the risk of sounding prosaic, like there is something fundamentally creative about starting a business. Like you want to make stuff. You want to show people the thing that you made. And that instinct to build just can lead you to kind of converging on solutions to problems way, way too early. So for our sins, we built a huge tech stack, tried to pay off a lot of future technical debt by being kind of perspicacious and imagining what the future would look like. And the reality is you do not know until like the rubber hits the road, you're interacting with customers, you're launching your second product line and all the complexities that come with that. Like the odds of you guessing the thing that you're going to need to build 2 or 3 years out are absolute zero. And I would just say, like, the less you can build up front and the more you can kind of use good testing and iteration frameworks to kind of build a vision of what's actually going to work, the better. We could have saved vast amounts of money and vast amounts of time if we'd learned that lesson.
Okay, that's tech. We'll just go down or jump in, whatever you want. Go crazy.
I mean, I think the one thing that we are still in the process of learning and developing is that when your organization reaches a certain size, you have to bring in some of the practices that you may have left behind or hope to have left behind in some of the big companies. So we're now at a point where we really need to focus on management of people because we have so many people and people don't just intuitively know what to do all the time, right? Like, how do you bring in management in a way that doesn't create hierarchy? And how do you scale up your organization in a way that doesn't require you to do the things that you hate about big companies? And so we're still very much in that process of figuring out, well, how do we get everyone to be completely in sync with each other without having to, sit over people and say, like, this is what you need to do?
And how do you do that?
I mean, for us, a lot of it has come down to, really working on our values and making people know how to make value-based decisions, because we've decided that our values, even though they're emotional things like love, honesty, those are actually the things that are going to result in good business outcomes for us. And so now, everyone can give me an example of where we've acted in accordance with our values, but what's trickier is what do you do when you have value conflicts, right? So you're trying to make a simple product, but you need to have disclosure as well. If you don't have disclosure, you don't have honesty, which is one of our values. So it's around helping people to make decisions where values conflict with each other, and you really need to enable that decision making if you want to be able to scale up and not sit over everyone's shoulder and check what they're doing.
Okay. Reza, you're incredibly successful at what you did over here. You're moving internationally and that sort of stuff. What did you fuck up when you were starting, though?
So I think part of it links to what Romi's just said, but it's...
No, give me something new.
Well, it's different, but what is similar is around what big companies do well, yeah, which is around process, very clear accountability, roles and responsibilities. When you start, like, I was always like, we don't want process, we don't want to be like a big corporate, let's just like trust people and kind of leave things a little bit sort of unclear and up in the air. But what I've seen is that when you do that, then there's a lack of accountability, and then as you grow, it becomes very difficult to pinpoint who is responsible for something when it doesn't quite go right. And it's not because you want to pick that person out, but it's because people need to feel a sense of accountability and responsibility over a specific task. Otherwise, as you grow, it becomes very easy to just kind of fall through the cracks. So now we've realized how important it is to have very clear accountabilities, roles and responsibilities, and process, so that people are clear on how to get from A to B in the most efficient way. Otherwise, people will go from A, then to D, then to F, and then back to B. But that's just massively inefficient. Just spell things out, because I believe that most human beings want direction and they want clarity, which is actually counterintuitive to how a founder thinks, right? Because a founder doesn't want that. It's why they're a founder. But most people need that clarity.
Okay, I like that. Take it. Sven?
Maybe one addition is also, I would say, on the product side. Mistake that I've seen quite a few times is actually, if you start to scale up and volumes of sales are increasing rapidly, you need to have a proper quality control in place as well. Because obviously, I mean, if you're selling a few pieces or have a few subscribers on the software, it's more easy to basically adjust and adapt the problem if there are certain issues. If your customer base is scaling up and ramping up fast, you need to have a very good quality control on the supplier side as well. If you work with suppliers on the production cycle, for example, you need to be able to ramp up and follow basically the growth path with the same quality. And that's also a challenge that many startups and scale-ups fail at.
Okay. Talking about why startups fail and what they get wrong and that sort of stuff, who are you, what don't you think people get about scaling that they really should be getting now? So in 2019, another drip, what are people getting wrong about scaling still? That you're like, for fuck's sake, you should just know it's this. Tell them what that thing is.
I mean, I still think focusing on your burn rate when you're scaling is really, really important. I do see a lot of companies that don't have a plan to reduce the burn rate. And if you're not planning to reduce your burn rate, then you are going to be very, very reliant on investors who are comfortable with the high burn rate. And that actually tends to be quite cyclical. So if you don't have a plan to reduce your burn rate, get one, because the cycle is going to turn at some point.
Okay, Reza, give me something deep.
I'd probably say just the importance on hiring like the best people that you can find for a specific role. I think that's to me, like that's the golden bullet that then everything else falls into place. But I don't think people focus enough on it.
Okay, Daniel?
I'm trying to think. I think for me, and I wouldn't presume to tell everyone how to scale up their business, but
Do it. They want it, apparently.
I don't know.
Wait, you disagree with that? You don't think people want to be led?
No, I think people definitely do want to be led.
Carry
But I think the tricky thing is the kind of the fidelity or the kind of resolution of problems. So in the morning of after your Series A, you're like, all you're thinking about is like burning down the mortgage industry and blowing up the banks and the future of everything. And then by the afternoon, you're like, oh shit, no one's answering the phone, so our forced customer's not getting dealt with. And you kind of end up in this kind of like vast oscillation, particularly as founder, between like very tiny operational details, which are completely essential, and large strategic kind of hyperbolic tales that you're telling. And that narrows and narrows and narrows as you start to enter the scale up and you have real numbers and you're starting to go through the issues of that which worked for 20 people doesn't work for 50 or 100. And then as you kind of go through the fundraising cycles, you step out of the operational detail to go and tell big stories to the world before being pulled back in again. And I think a kind of finding discipline as a senior management team at being able to have a structured process for kind of like allowing the responsibility to flow downhill to your kind of operational leaders in the business, so you're not being pulled into who's answering the phone. But simultaneously, like finding that kind of middle ground between like we're going to blow it all up and the phone, which it tends for me to either be like around international strategy or new product lines, can be a really difficult discipline, and that's something I've struggled with personally.
Okay, it's interesting. All right, some quick questions before I go on to one last thing, and then we'll do some questions for the audience. Yeah, got some time. Right, okay. Reza, looking back over your history, I think it's fair to say you didn't get it right first time, right? You got bashed in the press and all of that sort of thing. Now you seem to have made some real changes and that sort of thing. Tell me how you didn't just make cosmetic changes. Tell me what you really sort of focused on at your core to change what the original pieces sort of bashed you for, which was like lack of community, space, and all of that sort of thing. Like, how have you like fundamentally made some real changes?
So I think it's around a big change we made a few years ago was really aligning our culture within our business to the culture and community that we wanted to build in our spaces, yeah? And that was counterintuitive because traditional corporate culture has a certain way versus when you're trying to create a highly consumer-centric, community-led environment for your customers, right? It's different to a traditional corporate culture, but we sort of a couple of years ago really aligned the two and really said that, okay, if we want to create a strong sense of community and belonging in our buildings, then we have to create that internally. I think that went through a whole exercise of really sort of defining our purpose and really getting people aligned behind the mission and what we were creating, and really created that same culture. And I think that has led to, amazing outcomes.
Okay, so you kind of lost your way at the start, and then you reevaluated and you reaffirmed what your purpose was, and then sort of continued on.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Romi, what's your average customer profile? And talk to me about how referrals sort of play into that and whether you have to have different strategies for age groups and that sort of thing.
Well, when we started off, I think we were like most people in that we got a lot of early adopters who were willing to trust a startup with their pension money. So our typical customer was, kind of early 30s, I would say. What we now see is that around 60% of our customers are between the ages of 30 and 45. 20% are on either side of that, so actually 20% of our customers are over the age of 45, and maybe a little bit more now based on the data that I'm seeing. And so we actually have 3 core segments. So we have our big segment, which is people who are mid-career and who are switching jobs quite frequently and leaving their pensions behind and want to manage that online. We have people who have probably had one job and just can't fathom the thought of managing a pension on a piece of paper, and so they must have PensionBee, and they tend to be younger than 30. And then we have people who are approaching drawdown age, and who actually want to take money out of their pension. And so quite a lot of the business that we now do is around withdrawals, which is a brand new kind of regulatory allowance that people have been given in 2014. It's like a brand new space where virtually no one does it digitally. And there's a lot of misconceptions that, your average 50-year-old is so different from your average 30-year-old. But actually we find that many of our key value propositions are quite universal across, across all 3 of our segments. So, regardless of how old you are, you want your digital experience to be quite seamless. Regardless of how old you are, when you pick up the phone, you want to talk to someone who knows what they're talking about. And regardless of how old you are, you want some, in a financial product, you want something that you can trust. And that's pretty much universal. Everything else is sort of tinkering at the edges and understanding that if you're 50 and you have 5 pensions, you've probably been in the state's second pension at some point, and you might have contracted out, which is stuff that wouldn't impact a 25-year-old. So, you need to keep the core the same and then sort of tinker around the various segments.
Okay. Can I get an idea of how many people want to ask a question, if any? I don't know. You don't have to. Don't feel like you have to. Anyone? We've got one so far. Okay, right. Can we carry on for 1 sec? All right, give me something real to close with. What's the biggest issue that you guys either see on the horizon or in your rearview mirror at the moment that's causing you sleepless nights? Daniel. I saw you look, that's why I picked
No, it's fine. I mean, so for us, we recently made this pretty fundamental transition as a business. So we are our primary business being a mortgage broker, and as of last week, we became a mortgage lender, which from a regulatory perspective is quite a big transition, but more importantly, from a debt perspective, is a much bigger transition. So we had to go out and raise about £500 million worth of debt, because mortgages are obviously big old chunky loans. And the kind of level of kind of differentiation and kind of like corporate governance, like being grown-ups about how you're managing your accounts and everything that we had to go through in order to survive the diligence around raising that kind of debt was like a real shock to the system, to be frank. And and all of the things you're trying to avoid about corporate culture and enormous compliance teams and endless committees suddenly become like a fundamental reality for you very, very quickly if you're trying to cross that Rubicon. And it was interesting, and on one hand I found it deeply upsetting as I watched my business transform before my eyes. But on the other hand, you kind of realize that woven into the kind of the bureaucratic processes is just some real kernels of great common sense and kind of consumer protection. And I think if you can kind of synthesize the purpose of why you're doing these things and abstract away the kind of unpleasant practice of doing it, there's real value. So it's a huge deal for us to have that in the rear view.
Okay, Romi, what's causing you sleepless nights?
I'm thinking a lot about, inconsistencies, and one of the things that worries me a lot is now that we're a significant asset owner, I know that we own all the indices. I know that we own virtually every major company in any index through our pension funds, and I don't know exactly what they're doing all the time. And as one of the people who I worked with phrased it, it would be totally unacceptable for us to be investing some of our money in places that are doing things that are inconsistent with our values. And so I'm thinking a lot about how I can bring that information more to the forefront and kind of move on a journey to, put our money where our values are.
Right. That's good. All right, Reza?
I would say we're kind of going through quite a big transition in terms of growth and scale, and it means that I have to also transform the way I do things, because I started the company, with a £1,600 overdraft doing every single job, and now with 250 odd people, I can no longer do that. So I have to transition into kind of trusting people and letting go of the details, and that's like a journey that I have to go on, right? To let go of my sort of previous habits and ways of doing things.
Okay. Sven, anything to add?
Maybe a small thing to add. When scaling up, I guess it will sound familiar to some of you as well, is you get more and more offers for an acquisition at some point, or you get into that kind of discussions. Mm-hmm. I see quite a lot of founders struggle is like, should we sell now and get a pretty decent deal, or should we take it 1, 2, 3 steps further? Those kind of things could keep you awake at night as well at some point in time.
All right, gentlemen at the front, who are you? What are you saying?
I'm Steve. I've just had a pre-seed startup. So we built an MVP. We've got 150.
No ads. What's your question?
Okay, straight to the point. Like it. How do you grow from no one knowing about you, apart from 150, to a significant next stage where you could go for accelerators and investment?
Fair question.
I guess a thing that worked well for us, which only really works well in the kind of consumer space, was just we did a lot of press early on. It was like the cheapest acquisition channel. We were able to bring in some comm support for not much cash at all, and it kind of got us that first 500 customers.
Awesome. Press as well?
Yeah, we've definitely done, we definitely did some press when we launched. What we uncovered in the pensions market was actually horrifying, and we wanted to tell everyone about it. So definitely something that helped. But you do have to think about that, because you're not going to be the same challenger, when you're a small company to when you're a bigger company. Like your positioning as a challenger will evolve and change. And I think having some foresight of that before you, attack everyone in the press is also a good idea.
All right, Reza, anything different or press?
Well, press helps, but look, ultimately, there's nothing is better than showing outcomes and actually delivering great results. Because it's proofs in the pudding.
So focus on products.
Focus on delivering a great product, great numbers, and tangible outcomes, and then everything else will come.
Okay. Were there any other questions that I missed or anything? It's very bright and very smoky for some reason. Excellent. Right. Oh, one more. Damn it. Go for it. Who are you? What do you want? If it's an ad, I'm cutting you straight off, so fair warning.
No, I'm not going to add.
Who are you?
I'm Dan. I'm a brand consultant. It's just a question around partners. And Daniel mentioned his kind of transformative campaign. And I know that was with Uncommon. How important is it to work with similarly disruptive partners as you grow?
I think it's vital, and particularly on the brand side. So I'm staring into the mist, where you've got kind of consultants coming in and trying to crawl into the collective psyche of the business and unpack what you're about and put it on TV.
Who hurt you? All right.
I was whenever you would get the pitch, I always felt like it was someone showing me like a prospective tattoo for my wife. I was like, this is, so I could be a little sensitive to it.
It's a strategy.
So you've got to find someone who you fundamentally trust, who you think is on the same wavelength. And Uncommon ended up being that partner for us. So it made a big difference.
Anyone else got anything to add? Awesome. Then we're going to do something that I like doing, which is called quickfire, which makes you feel really uncomfortable, but it's a fun way to end. All right, so does everyone understand what quickfire is? Very quick answers, okay? So quick answers are the question I'm going to give you. All right, we'll start from Sven and we'll work our way down, and we'll just keep going until maybe a minute and a half. All right, stand up or sit down meeting?
Sorry?
Stand up or sit down meeting?
Stand up.
All right, hug at work or no hug at work?
Depends on the mood.
Oh, all right. Best meal you've ever had?
Burger at Haché.
Oh, all right, nice, yes. Who will be the best place to work for in 10 years? Facebook, Google, Apple, or Amazon?
Oh, none of them. Terrible. Probably Google.
That's what we want. All right. You got 10 minutes free. What do you do?
Go out and walk.
Oh, nice. All right. Apart from buying the book, what's the best bit of advice everyone should implement today?
Be yourself.
Okay. What's the biggest issue your business has right now?
Already growing out of our new office space.
Okay. Oh, my God. All right, guys, pick it up a bit. All right. What's your biggest red flag for you in a person?
Oh, that's a good question. I think never talking about a thing they've made, just talking about things other people did around them.
Okay. Donate your body to science or organs to people?
Option 2.
Okay. High fives, are they ever business appropriate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Business card, dead as a dodo or hell yeah, give me 'em all?
I haven't had one in a really long time.
Okay. Last one. All right. You've got to kill one, kitten or a puppy?
Oh, definitely puppy.
Puppy. Same. Okay, would you rather have one 1,000-year life or 10 100-year lives?
10 100-year lives.
Okay, would you rather soil yourself once a day or have your past and future web browsing history sent to everyone in this room?
Would you rather what?
Would you rather shit yourself once a day or would you rather have your past and future web browsing sent to everyone in the room?
The latter.
Okay. Technology you've got most hope for?
Anti-aging.
Okay. How many redheads are you friends with?
Like half a dozen.
Okay. What sound does a seal make?
Sorry?
What sound does a seal make?
I won't even give it a try. To be honest.
No one's going for a drink with you now. All right. On a scale of 1 to 10, how good are you at keeping a secret?
8.
Oh, good one. Biggest disappointment?
Leaving my flat and moving to a house.
Okay. Best bit of advice you ever got?
That I shouldn't be involved. I should only make decisions that only I could make.
Oh, I like that. Passenger or driver?
Driver.
Where's the most innovation coming from in the world? Best answer is London here.
San Francisco.
Oh, also another one no one's going out for a drink with. Okay, right. Ninjas or pirates?
Ninjas.
All right. This is the one that will divide the room. Beyonce or Taylor Swift?
Oh, Beyonce.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you very much. Awesome.